What if all you needed to know how healthy a person is one single number? There are so many different things, like how able is a person to maybe reach some point with their arms and to reach another point or a certain stretch, or how able are they perform in their job or in their everyday lives, or how fast can they run a 5K. But what 5K? In which weather conditions? How humid is the air? Comparability is really a problem with many of these metrics. In the gym, is it an incline bench you're trying to compare to the other one? Is the bar actually 20 kilograms? Was it on a Smith machine or somewhere else? Is my hair just falling out because I have the genes for hair falling out, or because I'm just aging faster? All these questions can, to some extent, be solved by the concept of biological age. So, if you think about age, then everybody has a chronological age. Currently, we count chronological age from the day we are born and then onwards with time. So every single time you basically lived another year, you turn another year. So year one is the year in which you are basically finishing the process of living your first year. Year two, you might have guessed it, is then the same for year two. There are also cultures in which the day at which you're born is already year one and you are already age one, which through some perspective could also make sense. Now, biological age is actually not really your biological age, at least currently. So your biological age now is the concept of how old are you actually, how old is your body actually. But of course your body is still chronologically this old. So what does this even mean? What does biological age even mean? It means how you would compare to somebody else. It's just a comparison in the population of all humans. Probably not all humans, because for the purpose of making these reference numbers up in terms of how fast are you running, how able are you still mentally at age 85, you just compare yourself against the population. And what I was trying to say is that maybe these reference, the population reference, is not the entire population, because everybody doesn't contribute to a database of different values and metrics. So there might be a certain selection bias going on. Nonetheless, the question is now, if I, at age 35, for example, would be able to perform as well as somebody that is on average 25. Not on average 25, but I would be able to perform so good that I could basically keep up with the average 25-year-old in every single metric. Then the question is, what is the difference between those two? And the concept of biological age now just states, maybe the 25-year-old, the average 25-year-old, has basically a chronological age of 25 and also a biological age of 25. Now, the average 35-year-old has a biological age of 35, probably. So the average is always basically equal to 1. So the average of the population is always equal to 1, depending, of course, on the metric now. Then what you can do is you can compare yourself, if you're slightly better or slightly worse, to the different people at different ages. Why does this even work? Because people with age tend to get worse in every single metric. There is this thing called mortality, also called all-cause mortality, and this basically kind of indicates how well a person is still able to do things, because it kind of correlates with a lot of diseases. In short, if this is you at age 0, then there is something, and then it goes down at age 10, if this is mortality. And so 10-year-olds, according to Andrew Steele in a recent talk on the Royal Society's YouTube channel, said that at age 10, you are basically the lowest risk. You have the lowest risk of dying. What is mortality even? It's the risk of you dying in the next year. So now at age 10, you are the safest, and then it goes up. But it doesn't just go up like this, or it does also not go down. It just goes up increasingly. So there is a rate at which basically the rate itself increases. Not the rate itself increases, but the incline increases. So if there's a certain incline to this, then the incline itself increases and the function looks like this. So as you age, you basically begin also to age faster. Whereas if we had a linear function, then you wouldn't you would basically age at the same rate. And there is also a difference in between animals and humans and different kinds of animals, that they age at different rates at different points in time. So if you might compare yourself to a dog, then your dog might age faster in the beginning and then slower, or the other way around. I don't quite know. Now, the reason this is so interesting is because all the different diseases also correlate basically with this graph to a certain extent. So the risk of cancer goes up drastically. The risk of dying of heart disease goes up drastically. So all these different diseases kind of correlate with this, and therefore, to some extent probably, the performance also correlates with this. So therefore, if you take any kind of metric, such as you do blood work, and then you can see how your testosterone, for example, compares against the average 25-year-old, against the average 18-year-old. And this comparison, therefore, is not really a comparison to your biological age at 25, which you might have no data on. Most people probably don't really have an extensive data set on how able physically and mentally they were at age 25 or at age 18. So therefore, you just compare yourself against the average of the population. And nevertheless, because you compare yourself against everybody else, it's kind of a ranking system. And therefore, reducing all the different factors to biological age, all the different metrics to one single metric, which is biological age, is basically the ultimate comparison. You can say, okay, I'm younger than I actually are, at least biologically. And this is something, a concept basically that most people understand. There's a person, and the person looks like he is or she is 50, but if she is in fact 75, then that's really good. But if in fact the person is 35, then it's really bad, because there's just a difference. So the younger we are at an older age, basically, the better it is. Now the question of optimizing this function arises. And I think for optimizing this function, the easiest would be to just assume that 18-year-olds are just the healthiest. This would be a very easy assumption. So let's just say age 18, you are the healthiest. Of course, actually it's age 10, but age 10 you probably don't have your muscle mass, and you also haven't reached your height yet, and you probably also haven't gone through puberty yet. So therefore the comparison is not that good. So therefore maybe let's just take age 18 and then go upwards. Now from age 18, basically the optimization point is always to be younger. So the optimization function we want to follow, so optimization basically has two variants, maximization and minimization. Now that's in theory a very easy concept. Why is maximization and minimization, why are these methods so good? Because if there is any function, let's just say again, we have the mortality function. Then in this function, minimizing mortality is as easy as going back in age, and maximizing mortality is as easy as going up in age. So the reason this is so useful is because we understand maximizing just more or minimizing very well. Whereas with other functions, for example, let's take a sinus function. Then the problem is that the sinus function is of course symmetrical and has just these different maximas all over the function and these different minimas all over the function. So the question of optimization is, where do I take this? Do I take this? Do I take this? Is this more important than this? If there is only one point in a graph that is the highest, or only one point in a graph that is the lowest, then it's just very easy. So therefore the maximization and the minimization, and therefore also the minimization of age, the biological age, is just a very easy concept that is easy to understand. So by combining these two concepts, by combining the minimization as a very easy function and also the age as something that is understood by basically everybody, because we visually see people all day long. We can observe people all day long that we assume that they are a certain age. And one could also argue that this assessment of other people's age by just seeing how they speak, by just seeing how they behave, by just seeing how they can put their grocery cart or their grocery bags into their car, for example, we just train ourselves constantly on a data set that is the human population, and therefore if we see somebody that seems to be older or younger, then we can very accurately assess, to some extent at least, how old this person is or in which age range a person is. Nobody would mistaken usually a 10-year-old to for a 85-year-old, for example. Of course, there is a certain range in which the guesses probably usually deviate. So if there is basically the ideal age in the middle, then probably people might guess maybe 5 years up or maybe even 10 years up. But of course, if you then show, so now if you plot this basically and you just say, okay, this is a graph, this is the ideal age, and then we have these different estimations on how old this person actually is, then maybe it's, let's just put it directly on this line. Here, somebody guesses the person is 5 years younger, another person guesses here 5 years younger, then this is 10 years. This is basically an outlier, and it might look similar here. And maybe most people would guess maybe within the 5-year range, and then we would have maybe also within 5 years down. And then a few outliers would say, oh, this person looks like 10 years younger than the person actually is. So for this reason, I think the concept of biological age makes sense. It would be very useful if there were different calculations in apps like Samsung Health, in Apple Health, and so on, because that's something that doesn't need to be explained. If I have my VO2 max, even though I would say I'm somewhat into fitness and I'm somewhat into maybe also into this new field of longevity and try to find out more about how I maybe can stop my aging process, even though it is just starting. But nevertheless, if I have VO2 max and I have a value of currently 53, then what does it even mean? If I just want to explain randomly to a person on the street what my VO2 max is and why is this even important in terms of how long I will live and whether I can see my grandchildren or not, then this is just a very hard metric to explain. I mean, it's how much air can you intake at maximum? So how much air can you basically can your lungs provide to your blood vessels? What is basically the maximum performance your lungs can deliver? And how does this all then correlate to mortality? Does this increase mortality? Does this decrease mortality? It turns out that seemingly VO2 max can predict mortality to a certain extent. And according to people like Peter Attia, or also to Midlife Crisis, who recently appeared on Andrew Steele's YouTube channel, VO2 max would be the one indicative value, or a very good value, to basically just base one's life expectancy assessment on. A second one that is a little more common and can be measured more easily would be resting heart rate. What I actually have on my watch here is my resting heart rate over the last 7 days. It's basically the average, and I will now just take it off. And what you could see, at least for a brief moment at which it was in focus, down here is that the 47 is basically my resting heart rate. In the last weeks and months, I actually was up at 52, and then I got it down to 45 a few days ago again. And that's fairly low. It's basically above the athlete range. So in the best possible scenario, it lists resting heart rates of like 60. But this is also maybe not up to date, and there are also people online already stating that your resting heart rate probably should be a little bit lower than that. Similar maybe with VO2 max. The thinking is this: if a large portion of the population is not that healthy, then taking the average of the population and then comparing yourself against the average might not be the most useful tool anymore. Now, of course, life expectancy or lifespan or health span has increased over hundreds of years, but now it actually, I think in the US, went down in recent years. Historically, life expectancy was actually quite low because of a high child mortality, which obviously brings down the average. If there is a person that is 30-year-old and dies at age 30 and another one dies at age 0, then the average between those two is 15. In total, even if I ask friends that are also into fitness, they don't know the resting heart rate for the last 7 days. And what if then the calculation is slightly different? It's maybe the last 14 days, but they think it's the last 7 days. And maybe they do have their VO2 max, but it's not measured properly, but only measured on their Garmin watch. But maybe Apple has a slightly different algorithm. So therefore, of course, it would make sense to have one single number, a number everybody understands, and this number could be biological age.